Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 3, Chapter 7. Chapter outline: encaustic, fresco, tempera, oil, pastel, watercolor, gouache, and similar media, acrylic, painting and beyond, sumptuous images, mosaic, and tapestry. Encaustic. Encaustic is made from pigment, wax, and resin. Encaustic is known for rich, saturated colors. Encaustic was popular in antiquity, but is not commonly used today. Literary sources tell us that encaustic was an important technique to the ancient Greeks. In fact, the word encaustic comes from the Greek word for burning in. The earliest encaustic paintings to have survived, however, are funeral portraits created during the 1st century of our era in Egypt, which was then under Roman rule. Portraits such as this were set into casings of mummified bodies to identify and memorialize the dead. The saturated colors of this painting, almost as fresh as the day they were set down, testify to the permanence of encaustic. The modeling that defines the shape of the face, the shadows to either side of the nose, and the brilliantly lit up tip of the nose that make the nose seem more three-dimensional makes the portrait feel lifelike, even if its subject was not alive. The technique of encaustic was forgotten within a few centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, but it was revived during the 19th century, partly in response to the discovery of the Roman Egyptian portraits. Contemporary artists turned to encaustic for its durability and richly textured painting surface. Fresco. Fresco is a mural painting technique made on either wet or dry plaster. Fresco is highly durable and requires careful planning. There is nothing tentative about fresco, whereas in some media the artist can experiment, try out new forms, and then paint over them to make corrections. In fresco, every touch of the brush is a commitment. The only way an artist can correct mistakes or change the form is to let the plaster dry and then chip away at it and start all over again. Frescoes have survived to the present day from the civilizations of ancient Mediterranean, from China, from India, and from the early civilizations of Mexico. Among the most spectacular examples in Western art are the magnificent frescoes of the Italian Renaissance, such as this one, which we see here, painted by Raphael for Pope Julius II to decorate the walls of the Vatican. Fresco. Fresco has been used for public art and may reaffirm or challenge the architecture surrounding it. Such as in this example, a fresco painted by Diego Rivera, where he's actually reaffirming the structure and challenging some of societal assumptions and norms in this beautiful fresco of making a fresco showing the building of a city, mural painted in 1931. While Raphael used the architecture of the Vatican Palace to frame his tranquil, idealized scenes, Orsico challenged and contradicted the chapel's architectural setting. His characters writhe within the space they occupy, pushing beyond the structural limits. We feel as if the painting is about to burst through the chapel's structural framework, bringing its stones down upon our heads. The brash, jarring colors unnerve us and portray suffering and violence that Orsico saw both in history and in the modern era. Tempera. Tempera produces bright and clean colors that are built in layers and cannot be blended. The most popular binder for tempera is egg yolk, and supports for tempera paintings were typically wood panel or vellum. Tempera's popularity declined after the invention of oil paint. An exquisite example of tempera painting as it was practiced during the Renaissance is a scene of Holy Women by Girolamo di Liberi. It pictures the 3 women who visit the tomb of Christ after his crucifixion, only to discover that it is empty. An angel sits next to the tomb's entryway. The painting is a manuscript illumination, meaning that it is painted on a sheet of calfskin vellum bonded in a handmade book. The narrative appears within a letter A painted maroon, blue, and green at the beginning of a song in the manuscript. A blue face on the left side of the letter is a decorative element. The saturated colors are typical of tempera painting. Liberi built the forms of his work slowly and patiently through layers of small, precise brushstrokes. The shimmering gold provides textural variation and an air of holiness. One modern painter who experimented with both commercial and handmade tempera was Jacob Lawrence. Like Liberi, Lawrence used tempera to make images that tell a story. In this case, the story of the Great Migration, the migration of thousands of Black Americans from the South to the North United States, beginning around 1910. Lawrence explained that he was drawn to the raw, sharp, rough effect of tempera colors, the qualities he brought to the scene of the clandestine reading lesson here, with paint applied sparingly to simple forms. Oil characteristics. Oil paints mix pigments and oils. Oil paints dry slowly, color can be blended, and thin glazes create translucent effects. An example of oil painting from its first decades of popularity is the Ampholi double portrait by Jan van Eyck. This portrait of a prosperous couple in their home. They wear luxurious clothes, their hands are joined, and a small dog stands between them. The woman gathers her heavy gown and holds in front of her abdomen while her husband raises his right hand in a gesture of greeting. The couple, thought to be Giovanni di Nicole Affino and his wife, stand beside the ornate furniture covered in red velvet, while a chandelier with a single lit candle hangs overhead. The circular mirror on the far wall reflects not only the couple, but also two men standing in the room's doorway and looking in. Over the mirror, the painter's signature reveals Jan van Eyck was here. Oil applications. Oil paints can be applied with brushes, palette knives, and fingers, but crack over time as the paint dries. Oil paintings can be made on wood panel or canvas with small details or thick applications. Van Eyck's paintings demonstrate the best qualities of oil paint. It glistens with light that enters from the window and reflects off the brass chandelier and the mirror, taking advantage of the luminous effect created by glazes. Tiny details, some painted with brushes just a hair or two thick, describe the implied texture of the man's fur-lined coat. Rough wood floors, the dog's fur, and the smooth transparency of the beads in the background. Yet Van Eyck did not rely on brushes alone. He also used his fingers to manipulate the pigments, leaving fingerprints in the paint. The detailed view of the mirror shows us that Van Eyck changed his mind as he painted, shortening part of the mirror's frame just to the right in the top center. The shadowy remnant of this alteration, known by the Italian word pigmento, was likely not visible when Van Eyck finished the painting. It emerged as the oils dried and the layers of pigment became more transparent. The drying layers of oil pigment also shrank and cracked over time, like mud drying after a rainstorm. This created a network of cracks called craquelure, covering the entire painting. While oil paint can be applied in thin layers, it can also be thickly laid on the canvas. Sometimes the paint is so thick that it projects above the surface of the painting, and this is called impasto, the Italian word for dough. The mid-20th century artist J. DeFeo took impasto to dramatic lengths. The strokes of oil paint in her non-representational origin painting look thick and doughy, especially towards the top. Rather than applying her paint with a brush, DeFeo used a metal knife, scooping up paint and layering it onto the canvas. Looking carefully at the top of the painting, we can see the individual strokes of the knife. DeFeo repeated the scooping and layering action over and over, building up so many layers of thick paint that they stick out far above the canvas surface. The impasto even cast a shadow against areas of the painting. Pastel, watercolor, gouache, and similar media. Pastel comes in sticks, but can be manipulated with a brush or added with water to create a wash. The American painter Georgia O'Keeffe used pastel for her White Shell with Red. The work reveals the intense saturated color typical of pastel. The rich red hill in the background allows the pearly white shell, tinged with yellow and pink, to stand out as the focal point. O'Keeffe drew the image with pastel sticks. She then smoothed the drawing strokes with a brush and with her fingers so that the colors blended seamlessly. The paler pink in the lower section of the painting may indicate that she used water to thin the pastel for a less intense effect. The master of playing with scale, the artist used her pastel painting technique to help viewers contemplate the form and the beauty of this common shell. Pastel, watercolor, gouache, and similar media. Watercolors consist of pigment, gum arabic, and water, and is painted in thin, translucent washes. The leading characteristic of watercolors is their transparency. They are applied not thickly like oil paints, but thin and translucent washes. Although opaque white watercolor is available, it is reserved for special uses. More usually, the white of the paper serves for the white, and the dark areas are built up through several layers of transparent washes, which takes on a depth without ever becoming completely opaque. Winslow Homer's Key West hauling anchor painting is a perfect example of what we might think of as employing a classic watercolor technique. Controlled but spontaneous in feeling, it gives the impression that the paint is still wet, with color bleeding beyond the drawn pencil lines. Homer achieved this effect by laying washes without waiting for the previous application to dry. The white of the paper serves as the boat's white hull, and the loose open brush strokes add a casual, laid-back quality. Pastel, watercolor, gouache, and similar media. Gouache uses white pigment to create opaque colors. Can be painted in translucent layers, dries quickly, and has flat, saturated colors. The Cuban painter Wilfredo Lam exploited both the transparent and the opaque possibilities of gouache in this painting, The Jungle. Lam's painting is an abstracted representation of an Afro-Cuban ritual. The row of figures in the mask-like faces participate in the performance amid tall bamboo and sugar canes. Their hand gestures broadly, but their legs and the plants form an imposing barrier. The gouache on the left side is opaque and impenetrable, trapping us and the figures in a shallow space. Elsewhere, Lam used translucent washes, layering color upon color. This is especially visible in the right side, where the lines of the canes are visible beneath the hazy blue, and the blues and the yellows nearby blend into each other. Acrylic. Acrylic paint is similar to oil paint, but dries more quickly and is more durable. Acrylic paint uses polymerized acrylic resin as a vehicle. Acrylic can mimic the visual effects of oil, watercolor, gouache, and tempera. Elaine de Kooning adopted acrylic paint soon after its invention. Her non-representational painting, Bullfight, uses thick brush strokes of brightly colored acrylic paint. We can imagine the movement of de Kooning's body and brush as she applied the paint in large sweeping motions. She made the yellow strokes on the right side of the painting when the brush was heavy and wet with paint. The maroon strokes nearby, however, came from a mostly dry brush, allowing us to see the paper below. Though not a literal rendering of the bullfights de Kooning watched during the trip to Mexico, the acrylic painting's gestural brushstroke effectively conveys the movement, the frenzy, the blood, and the pain of the sport. Painting and beyond. Painting is most commonly associated with easel painting. Painting is most commonly associated with easel painting, such as is depicted here in Diego Velázquez's painting, The Maids of Honor. Painting and beyond. Artists have explored painting without traditional supports. In more modern times, a number of artists have questioned the nature of painting itself, such as in this work by Berlin-based artist Katharina Gross, who has created this artwork with exuberant spray-painted colors that run riot over the walls, windows, fiberglass sculptures, fabricated boulders, articles of clothing, and piles of earth. In this piece entitled, One Floor Up More Highly, huge elongated blocks of white styrofoam establish a visual link with the white walls of the space. The artist has compared the styrofoam blocks to crystallized light, like sunlight, so blinding that it obscures our view for a moment. Unavoidably, the illustration here gathers the work into the traditional rectangular view of an easel painting, as though reclaiming it for the territory it has escaped from. Photography does this to our life experience all the time, whether we notice it or not. In fact, the artist did not intend the work to be a composition in the traditional sense at all. It was not meant to appear unified from a certain point of view outside the work. It was meant to be experienced from inside, moment by moment. In quotes from Gross, we put it together as we move, every second anew. And she explains, we continually remake the surrounding just as we do when we perceive the world. To see the installation is a coherent unit, is an illusion. Here is another example of artists who have explored painting without traditional supports. This piece done by Faith Ringgold combines fabric, acrylic paint, and ink pen in the piece called Street Story Quilt, part of a series of quilts on Black American life. Street Story Quilt uses images and text to tell its story in a triptych with 3 large panels. The same apartment building in New York City's Harlem neighborhood appears in each, captured at a different moment in the lives of a resident named AJ. A car accident that kills his mother and his brothers, a fire that killed his father, and his return from fighting in Vietnam. Colorful strips of fabric form the building and the triptych's border. While inspired by Black American quilters like the women of Gee's Bend, Ringgold's mixed media work is also firmly rooted in the tradition of painting. The figures are painted on the fabric. There is a narrative brought to life by the action of her hand. Yet, Faith Ringgold's painting is made on a quilt. Painting and beyond. Computers can be used to make paintings. Even computers can be used to make paintings. We see this in this example by Petra Kortright. It's entitled Golden Eye, All Characters Cheat. And it was created digitally and then printed on a large sheet of aluminum. The metal support offers its own reflective quality, making Kortright's brightly colored digital painting even more brilliant. The image recalls the work of the Impressionist painter Claude Monet, with green and white water lilies in a pond at the bottom. Flowers are a common theme in Kortright's art. The painting is otherwise abstract. Large streaks of highly saturated red and yellow fill much of the surface, contrasted with smaller lines in blue and white. All seems to be in motion. Painting and beyond. Mixed media art combines different art-making materials. As an example of mixed media art which combines different art-making materials, here's a work by Christian Boltanski which combines photographs in 10 biscuit boxes and 6 metal lamps. One example of mixed media art which combines different art-making materials is one that we already looked at when we were talking about art and some of the themes of art, and in particular stories and histories. This piece is made by Christian Boltanski, and it's called The Altar to Chase High School. Christian Boltanski relied on our memory of the historical episode known as the Holocaust, the mass murder of 6 million European Jews and other populations by the Nazis during World War II. Boltanski began with a photograph he found of the 1931 graduating class of Chases, a private Jewish high school in Vienna. 18 years old in the photograph, the students would have been 25 when Austria was annexed by Germany at the start of the war. Most of them probably perished in the death camps. Boltanski rephotographed each face, then enlarged the results into a series of abstracted and blurry portraits. The effect is as though someone long ago were calling out to us. We try to recognize them, but cannot quite. Our task is made even more difficult by the lights blocking their faces. The lights that serve as halos on one hand, but also remind us of the interrogation lamps. We wonder, too, what the stacked 10 boxes might hold: ashes, possessions, documents. They have no labels, just as the blurred faces have almost no identities. Without many iconographic details, Boltanski's work tells the tragic story of the Holocaust on an intimate and human scale. Another example of mixed media art which combines different art-making materials is this piece by George Barak, which we looked at in the drawing section of our text. It's entitled Still Life with Guitar and was completed in 1912. French artist George Barak experimented with bringing different pieces of industrial printed paper directly into his drawings. Here, a rectangular slice from a roll of imitation wood grain wallpaper has been incorporated into an abstract charcoal drawing of a guitar. The wood grain paper has simulated molding to either side, challenging us to view the paper as a three-dimensional strip of wood. Yet the illusion of space is undermined by the charcoal drawing of the fragmented guitar. The charcoal marks continue across the wood grain paper, confounding our desire to know whether the guitar is under the paper or vice versa. Sumptuous images. Mosaics create images with tesserae, are high-quality, durable, and rely on optical blending of colors. The mosaics create images with terrace and are highly durable and rely on an optical blending of colors, meaning the colors get blended in your eye because of the way that they're placed in close proximity together. The floors of the finer houses in ancient Rome were decorated with mosaics. The panel illustrated here once adorned a home at the seaside resort. At the center is the bust of a female personification of spring. She wears a crown and a necklace of flowers and fruits. To make the figure lifelike, the artist modeled the face and the neck using darker terrace to simulate the shadows falling on her three-dimensional figure. The surrounding areas are filled with geometric forms that play with space. The white diamonds appear to be the tops of the boxes, while the gray squares look like the vertical sides of the boxes. Or are the yellow diamonds the sides and the reddish squares the top? It's an optical illusion. Interest in mosaics revived in the 19th century, and important new workshops opened. Rich with historical association, mosaic has since reclaimed a place in the artistic practice. An example is Nancy Sapiro's Artemis Acrobats, Divas and Dancers. The whole work consists of 48 panels of glass mosaic set into the tile walls of a New York City subway station. The station serves Lincoln Center, home to many performing arts organizations. A small repertoire of figures, ancient Egyptian musicians, arching acrobats, dancers, ancient and modern, and the ancient Greek goddess Artemis, and the glamorously robed diva, female opera singer, appear again and again in various combinations across the panels, as though taking part in a theatrical performance or a ritual. The diva illustrated here was a new image for Sapiro, but many of the other figures had appeared in her paintings over the years, reflecting her ongoing themes and concerns. The white terrace in the background are large and easy to see, but the figures are composed of smaller individual pieces of tile whose colors seem to blend together. Sumptuous images. Tapestry creates woven images using warp and weft strings and can be functional as wall paintings for warmth. Unicorn tapestries are perhaps the most famous examples in Western art of tapestries. 7 monumental hangings made with wool, silk, and metallic thread that hunt and capture the mythical unicorn. In the Middle Ages, the unicorn was both magical and a symbol of purity. Popular legend held that this wild creature would calm in the presence of a young woman resting its head in her lap. The damaged 6th tapestry of the series likely pictured this, as the unicorn is fenced in and tied to a tree in the 7th. The land surrounding the beast is a riot of flowering plants. The colors for each leaf, stem, and blossom, including the shades and tints that modeled them, were formed by individual weft threads. If we imagine the complicated and time-consuming task of weaving each thread, we understand why tapestries were so expensive and why they were considered luxury items. The 7 tapestries in this series may have commemorated a noble wedding. The initials of each spouse were woven into either side of the tree and in the hanging corners. Sumptuous images. Artists have explored tapestry beyond traditional materials, including digital files and mechanical looms. Today, our definition of art has expanded to embrace a broad variety of media and techniques, with a number of artists turning to tapestries. One such artist is Paya White, who has exhibited tapestries depicting such unlikely subjects as crumpled aluminum and lazily curling smoke. White begins with a digital photograph, working closely with a tapestry workshop in Belgium. She settles on the color palette and the weaving patterns that will give the best image material form. A digital file of weaving instructions is prepared and the tapestry is woven from them on a computer-controlled loom. This concludes Chapter 7.